Good morning, friends. Welcome to this month's A Sweet Taste of HeartScapes. This is our monthly free class where we get to gather and circle around the system of Reiki as practiced from the perspective of its Japanese origins and the intersection of that practice with our daily lives. The topics of these classes really come through conversations with folks like you, with things that I'm seeing happening in conversations in other spaces, concerns that are coming up, challenges that are present in my life, in other folks' lives. And these little glimpses into what we are all navigating in our life on a daily basis gives a really powerful opportunity and opening to look at a system of practice like Reiki, like other systems of practice that we may have in our lives, and to really look at them through the lens of what does this have to do with my daily life? In what way does this practice help me to live a life that is more grounded, that is more spacious, that is more connected, that helps me to be more true to myself, to remember myself more completely, to be in fuller capacity of all of myself, all of my gifts, and to be in closer relationship with the people in my life, with the land that I live on, and with myself. And so that's kind of how we approach this monthly gathering. I'm always open to suggestions for new topics, things that are up for you, questions you might have about the system of Reiki. Sometimes we look at a specific element of the system and take that as our point of view. Sometimes we take an aspect of life and use that as our point of view. Either way, it is always a rich opportunity to gather together. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michaela. I run HeartScapes Reiki that is located here in Davis, California, Central California, and online, wherever you may be in the world. And I've been doing this work for close to 10 years in various capacities, but for the last 6 years, kind of as my central focus, and teaching the system of Reiki from the perspective of its Japanese origins for about the last 6 years. And in that time, I've had the opportunity to work with many of you, hundreds of folks in capacities like this, and one-on-one settings, in classes, in community spaces, and more recently in the 9-month deep dive program that we developed to walk people through the full system of Reiki from its origins, from the perspective of self-practice, from the perspective of honoring those origins and integrating this practice into our life in as deep and profound a way as we can. The recruitment for that next round of that program is technically open now, but will be officially open in January, and we will launch our next cohort in March. So if any of you have questions about that, I am happy to answer them either after class today or via email, or all of the ways. So with that, let us open today's conversation. This is a conversation that circles around again and again, and I've really come to see this as a major part of the heart of how I understand most of the challenges in my life, and the ways in which the system of Reiki has impacted my life. In other words, my relationship with the topic of stress and how I respond to stress in my life, the way that I view others respond to stress in their lives, has come to be really a central focus for me in my life and in my work. And I think that's because just, as I often talk about the system of Reiki as being profoundly simple and elegant, and therefore effective in how it impacts our life, the topic of stress also is relatively simple. It's direct. Stress is something that we all experience. It's an absolutely normal part of life. Stress is simply pressure coming from inside of ourselves, from outside of ourselves. It's change. It is, things moving and shifting. It's the decisions that we have to make. It's the actions that we have to take that are outside of just simply being still. Stress is how we move through the world. It's not inherently bad, it's inherently normal. Any change, any growth, any learning that we've ever experienced, any transformation that we've ever experienced, anything new that we've ever tried, whether it's challenging or joyful or all of the above, involves stress. Again, that pressure that is put on us as we move out of stasis, out of stillness. Change requires stress, and change causes stress. So stress is not bad. However, stress can also be a source of great suffering in our lives, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, right? When stress, either the subject of the stress or the object that's causing the stress becomes too great for our capacity, or our internal resources have been depleted to the point that we can't meet that stress, that change, that pressure, then it causes problems for us. And so learning to navigate stress inside of ourselves, inside of the territory that we have control over, is essential for living a happy, balanced, well life, and for meeting the challenges that we all have to meet in our day to day. The world presents us with tremendous pressure, with tremendous change, tremendous challenges, and always has. There's often a feeling that the times that we're living in, right, when they come to be intense, as they are in this moment, situations in the world that are causing tremendous stress, even for those of us who are not directly impacted by them. Oftentimes we can think of that as like, there have never been times as hard as these, but there has. I assure you there has. Throughout all of history, there has been times that are as difficult as these. And for the most part, we survive. How we survive and whether or not we retain a sense of thriving inside of that experience as individuals, not just collectively as humans, matters to our lives. And so that's a little bit of a longer spiel than I intended to give to introduce our topic today. But again, it's one of these topics that on the surface seems very simple, but when we scratch that surface, it can get very deep. And so I just wanted to kind of honor that a little bit. So with all of that context being said, let's drop in with a little bit of a meditation. We like to open up with kind of dropping into the space together, dropping into this topic, and just kind of going inside a little bit and digging into what this topic has to share for us in a given moment. Sound good? Okay. So wherever you are, as well as you can, given whatever activity you're in, I'm just gonna invite you to come to a place of settling. Even if you're driving, which I know at least one of you are, just giving yourself a moment to settle into the space that you're in, and just feel your body supported by the structure below you. To let your belly get a little bit softer. To perhaps roll your shoulders a couple times to invite a bit of relaxation in the muscles there. And anywhere else that you tend to hold tension. Just bring a little bit of attention to those places and a little bit of a response to any tension that you might find. To just invite a little bit of letting go. Each exhale inviting a little bit more. Sometimes one of the most valuable practices we can offer ourselves on a regular basis is simply the practice of noticing how we feel. physically, emotionally, in a given moment. And then to notice what we need in that moment as a result of how we feel. And can we give ourselves some small piece of that, which might be as simple as stretching a tired muscle or adjusting our position or acknowledging something that we've been ignoring. And so, with a little bit more softness in your body, perhaps a lot more softness, letting your belly expand with your breath from that place of softness and support. We'll bring our body and our breath into alignment with each other. Our body surrendering to the movement of our breath, and our breath buoying our body, nourishing, offering structure. And then we can bring our mind, our attention into this posture for practice. The body, the breath, and the mind connected, integrated in this moment by resting your attention on your breath and drawing your focus inward. Focusing your attention in your low belly, in the energy system governing the system of Reiki. This is the first diamond, the first energy center, our grounded and rooted place, the home of our true self, our spark of life. So, just with a couple of breaths, following your breath in and down, and welcoming yourself home here in the center of your low belly. Your home that remembers you. Acknowledging that sometimes it can be challenging to bring our attention inward for a wide variety of reasons. And so being gentle with yourself if this feels true. And then from this grounded place, I just want to share this quote from the Book of Joy from Douglas Abrams. The problem is not the existence of stressors, which cannot be avoided. Stress is simply the brain's way of signaling something is important. The problem, or perhaps the opportunity, is how we respond to the stress. And so, from this grounded place, this centered place, this home, I'm going to invite you to reflect on a couple of questions. Firstly, how would you describe your relationship with stress? In this moment, ask yourself, what is my relationship with stress in general? How would I describe that relationship? Just letting anything that comes come without trying to control the response. And then consider, how do you know when you are stressed? How do you know when you are experiencing stress? What cues come from your body or from your heart or from your mind? How do you know when you are experiencing stress? And then related to this, can you tell where you tend to hold stress in your body? Are there places in your body that that stress gets held and carried and stored? And if you find that you're not sure, then just take a couple of breaths and ask yourself, show me where I hold stress in my body. Just take a couple more breaths here. And just in whatever way feels right, just invite you to just share a little bit of gratitude to yourself for the insights that you have noticed, for all of the insight that you carry in your body, without your conscious mind having to track it all the time. And then coming back into this space together. So I encourage you, either now as we're listening or when we're off this call, to just do a little bit of journaling about what came up for you. Part of our practice is in noticing the things that tend to kind of run in the background of our attention, bringing those more to the front of our mind, to our consciousness, so that we can more consciously and intentionally respond to them. So journaling is a really useful way of doing that. When I'm working with folks one-on-one or in groups, this is an ongoing practice that we employ, simply noticing as we go throughout our day what how the topics that we're working with show up in our day-to-day, and helping and starting to track that. And then we go from there. And if any of you who are here live have any reflections that you want to share about what you noticed, what came up for you with those questions or that moment of dropping in, I would love to hear from you. Just give you a moment to think about that. You can come off a chat, or you can come off
I'm
of
happy
mute,
to.
or you can go in the chat. Go ahead,
I'm
Nate.
happy to speak. Yeah. It's so. I do generally feel stressed a lot of the time at work, and I do feel like trying to find a balance, especially with this hybrid sort of remote working from home. It can be quite difficult sometimes for me to just switch off. So me just sitting in the chair and just listening, I just felt like my body just dropped into the chair, and I would have happily just fell asleep. And I feel like that's because my sleep has obviously been affected because of stress. So that was quite interesting. But when you talked about the sort of the pain, or where the sort of stress resonates in the body, I felt it especially within my shoulders, and it was always going down the left side of my arm. So I felt it was very concentrated, more there than anything. So that was interesting as well. But yeah, so that was a little bit. I think with some of this other stuff that you were talking about in regards to when you were saying certain stuff, like I felt like my vision or my mind was going into some sort of oblivion, some sort of like, so I was just getting like some, yeah, funny lights, shall I say. I don't know how to describe it, but yeah.
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 Yeah. Thank you, Preston. Nadine or Jewel, anything you want to share? Okay.
Well, I felt just that, I mean, when you asked about relationship with stress, it just feels lifelong, like it's just been a long-term relationship. So that was kind of an interesting perspective to realize. And feeling it, I know it was really easy for me to identify where I carry it because it's always my neck and my shoulders, my chest. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So there are so many directions that we could take this conversation because while simple, the topic of stress is profound, right? It touches us every day in so many different ways. And it touches us in ways that, as I said in the opening, are actually very beneficial to us, that work with our own growth and learning, and in ways that are incredibly detrimental. There are many different kinds of stress, right? Some of which are quite brutal and oppressive, right? Outside of our control, but that we are subjected to. And then there's daily stress, like the stress of, doing a job that we're choosing to do and that supports us and, helps us meet our needs in many ways. And yet carries with it these pressures. There are many ways that we could talk about this, and we don't have the time. So I want to just kind of focus our attention in a couple of ways that I think, at least that's kind of alive for me right now. As I mentioned, this topic is one that we spiral around again and again because of its importance. And so if you go back in the recordings of these classes and in other recordings on my YouTube channel, we talk about, lots of different aspects of this topic. Welcome, Dario. Good to see you. So for today's conversation in our remaining time, there's a couple of things I want to focus on that were actually kind of new information to me and that I got really excited about and I wanted to share with you all. And the first one is the concept of allostasis. And this is a medical term that when I learned it, got me very excited because it felt very, very connected with my experience of practicing the system of Reiki. So I'm going to do my best to pull these threads together, but with full disclosure that this is a new term for me and it's something that I'm exploring. So this is very like emergent information, and I really look forward to hearing what you all might say about it. But the term allostasis means achieving stability through change. Achieving stability through change, which feels like a paradox, which is delicious because we love a good paradox around here. Achieving stability through change. And I learned this word through this book right here. It's called Pharmacology by Daphne Miller. My other passions are in the realm of food production, of gardening, of sustainability, of being in good, right relationship with the land, with regard to how we are in relationship with our food. And that is absolutely connected with my practice of Reiki, but is also just kind of a side passion of mine. And so this book it's a really interesting premise. Daphne Miller is a medical doctor, and she was very frustrated with kind of recurring challenges she was seeing with her patients and coming to see the world of Western medicine as having a certain amount of rigidity to it that that she was feeling wasn't allowing for some flexibility and some freedom in how to treat entrenched illnesses in more novel ways, or maybe not novel, but maybe going back to understanding illness in a more holistic way, the ways in which we might have understood it, related to it in the past. And what she observed was that in the world of agriculture, in the world of farming, there was already a robust mindset around holistic and sustainable approaches to growing food. So we would see that in the organic movement, the permaculture movement, in realms where people are going back to ways of growing food plants and animals in a way that's integrated, that looks at the system of a farm as a system, as a whole system with many, many, many parts that are in relationship to each other. And that a beneficial outcome of any one part, let's say the health of a tomato plant, is dependent on and is in relationship to all of the other parts. And that the ways in which modern agriculture approaches growing plants, where you have a farm that's all tomatoes, 100% tomatoes, no weeds, no animals, nothing else, with fertilizers and pesticides brought in to kind of keep a state of homeostasis, an unchanging state in that farm, has actually wreaked quite a bit of havoc on the land and on the health of the food that's produced, and on therefore our bodies, our own health. And so there's been quite a bit of progress made in the realm of relearning, re-understanding, re-implementing integrated systems for growing food. And Daphne Miller thought, wouldn't it be amazing if we approached medicine in a similar way, to look at the totality of the system of our bodies, and our bodies in relationship to our community, to our environment, and to kind of take a more holistic and permaculture view of how to treat diseases that have really stumped medicine. So that's what this book is about. She's touring farms and learning how they understand these systems, and then she's applying it to her work with patients. So that was a little advertisement for this book. It's super fun. It's written in the form of stories, right? These stories of these journeys that she went on. So in one of these stories, she introduces the concept of allostasis, achieving stability through change, as opposed to homeostasis. And just to paraphrase her description here, she said that as a doctor, they are encouraged to view homeostasis, unchanging states, as the way in which we preserve health, that are, biological levels of different, hormones and chemicals in the body, and states like heart rate and so on, should stay within a unchanging or very narrow range of change in order to achieve ongoing health. And that may be the case if we look at the body from a high view, right? But if we get into looking at the body from a close-up view, we see that we are a system made of many, many, many parts, and that each of those parts actually has potentially a very wide range of normal change that's necessary to keep that part in a state of health. So if we think about our, Jewel, and I'll put it in the email that follows up, but the book is called Pharmacology, and the author is Daphne Miller. I'll drop that in the chat in a minute. So what does that have to do with anything that we're talking about today? So if we think about, so I think she gives the examples of cortisol levels, particular hormone in the body. In a given day, our cortisol levels are going to vary widely. If we're making a decision, we're concentrating our attention on something, if we're sleeping, if we're exercising, if we're in an intense conversation, if we're meditating, if we're eating, the levels of cortisol that are needed by our body to enact those activities is going to vary tremendously. Quite a bit of change in that normal functioning of that part of our system. Similarly, our heart rate is going to need to fluctuate widely depending on what we are doing, what needs we have in a given moment. And that our overall sense of health and stability, so homeostasis, stability, depends on tremendous change that's constantly occurring. And reading this, I was like, isn't that life, right? That oftentimes, I have had a lot of suffering in my life when I have viewed the good and right thing as essentially an unchanging life, that things are more or less the same and that are predictable, more or less all the time. And that change, even positive change, as a source of stress is something that, causes anxiety and stress, as opposed to the truth, recognizing the truth that we are faced with change all the time, that things are changing all the time. And that if we're not able to respond to that change fluidly, then that's when we feel the impact of stress. And when we are able to change and respond fluidly, we often don't even notice the consistency of the change because we're in that flow. And what I realized is that practicing Reiki, starting with the practice that we opened this class with, Joshin Kokyoho, which has us bring our body, our mind, and our breath into alignment with each other and drop our attention into our belly, the foundational practice of the system of Reiki from its origins. Beginning with that foundational practice, what that does is to train our system, our body, our mind, our heart, our energy, to be in a grounded state that is also spacious and open and fluid and adaptable, and that where we feel connected to a wider web of life and therefore resources. Because it's when we don't feel resourced that we are so affected by change and by stress. When we do cultivate this state of being grounded, of being spacious, being connected, a number of things happen. Firstly, we more naturally and readily, and when I say achieve that state, I mean consistently over time, right? So through regular practice. We talk a lot, we work a lot in our classes here in HeartScapes around how to integrate these practices into our day-to-day throughout the day, as opposed to just time that we have set aside. So when we're doing that consistently, we find that we naturally adjust to change as the day goes by. We naturally meet stressors with more openness and more sense of possibility and resourcing. We feel more connected to the people in our life, to the world, to the resources that are at our disposal, and therefore we feel more resourced to deal with stress. And we're more connected to our internal landscape, like we began with, right? Bringing our attention inward, asking that question, how do I feel? And therefore, what do I need? And what response can I make? This is a practice we use over and over again. How do I feel? What do I need? What response can I make in response to what I've noticed? That in doing that and practicing that and habituating that kind of attention to our internal landscape, to our sovereign space inside, which is the only space I have full control over, I'm able to notice when I need to make a different decision with regard to stress. Because one of the types of stress that we touched on earlier is stress that is actually outside of what's actually good for our well-being over time. And there are times when we have no control over that, right? So I'm not talking about situations where we're being subjected to something that we can't control. That's a different conversation. Something where we're trapped in something that is abusive or traumatic that we can't get out of. But even inside situations like that, there are choice points that we can make, but we can't see those choices if we can't get still and get grounded and get spacious and connected. And so we find ourselves more and more able to make decisions that might change the source of stress. For example, we might choose to leave a job or change a career that felt impossible before we got grounded and spacious and connected. That was my story. I was in a job for a dozen years that felt like there's no way that I could leave this job because that would be ridiculous and I wouldn't know how to adjust and it would be too much stress and too much pressure to change. And got myself to the point where I did, and I started my own business. And boy, is that a big source of stress, right? I ended up leaving a marriage that I was in for 15 years because I got to the point where I could get enough clarity, enough grounding, enough spaciousness, enough sense of connection to resources that I could see the possibility of leaving a situation that was very painful and not good for me. So let me just pause there. I'm gonna just show us a model that can be helpful for seeing this, but I want to just check in to see if any of this is resonating, if any responses are coming from any of you. I'm going to type the name of the book in the chat as I promised while you take a moment to see if there's anything you want to share.
Hi, Michaela, it's Jewel here. I finally found out how to unmute myself. So I just wanted to share that, yes, what you're saying does resonate with me. And that one thing that I've found that's helpful, at least for me, is that, and that's like first acknowledging and being aware that I am stressed and that I am aware of where it does, where I feel it or how it impacts me. And then sometimes in the moment, obviously, we can't just go, aha, I'm stressed and I need to breathe. But sometimes, but the thing about that, where you say we do daily practice, is if we are in a daily practice of breathing in any way, whatever that means, just even saying, I need to take a deep breath and like reset, whether it's like a formal meditation or a practice, but just the practice of taking a deep breath.
Yeah.
We can then switch it from I am being controlled by this stress emotion event to I am now taking a deep breath and I'm resetting and calming and grounding. And so we can help our body heal or feel better or feel less stressed so we can actually think clearly or be able to move forward in that moment. So yeah, and it is different depending on what we're experiencing, but yeah, that daily breath, whatever it is, take a deep breath.
That topic of like where's our locus of control is so important in this conversation. I'm really glad that you brought that up because oftentimes when our stress can really tip into a dangerous place, right? Like we're now stepping out of kind of the normal stress or the type of stress that like generates energy and momentum for us to make decisions and take action, good stress, and tips over into like toxic stress. Oftentimes those are situations where we don't feel like we have any control. And as I said, oftentimes we don't necessarily have control over what other people are doing, over the way that a system is structured, maybe even over whether or not we're participating at all. We always have control over our interior responses. A teacher that I am in some classes with right now around the connection between grief and trauma talks about our interior space as this sovereign territory that we have complete control over. That is really the only place that we have complete control over. Back to that quote that we opened with from Douglas Abrams, that the stressors aren't necessarily the problem, but that there's an opportunity there to respond in a way that we choose that might be different than that automatic response. Sometimes when we talk about this in this kind of way, it can sound like or can feel like almost like victim blaming, like, oh, if you're overstressed, it's your own fault because you have control over your interior space, as opposed to other people shouldn't be behaving like that, right? And so I want to make a distinction here, right? This is not about saying, well, if you're stressed or you're feeling, if you're having health problems because of a really stressful environment that you're in, well, that's your fault because you could behave differently. That is not what we're saying, okay? That is a very disempowering way to view this topic, because there are numerous things that are outside of our control that shouldn't be the way that they are, right? That are unkind or unhealthy or unsafe, or coming from a place of greed, or all of the things, right? There are numerous oppressive structures in society that we are not responsible for, but we're subjected to, right? There are conditions at our jobs that are not fair, that should not be the way they are, that we are subjected to, right? In our family, same thing. So we're not shifting responsibility away from other people behaving with kindness and responsibility and integrity. What we are saying is that I cannot make anybody else behave with kindness and responsibility and integrity. I can't. I can influence them by the way that I show up, by the words that I say, right? By whatever structures there are that we have to influence each other. And maybe they can make a different choice, but I can't make anybody do anything. And when we realize that, that can feel very disempowering, right? We can resign ourselves to suffering. And just kind of speaking from my own experience, I mentioned leaving my marriage. Like, I really got to a point in that relationship that where there was abuse that was happening. And I got very resigned to it for a very long time. Like, there's nothing I can do about this. Like, leaving this relationship is too hard. I can't do it. I don't have the capacity. I don't have the resources. And so I'm going to have to deal with the stress of this situation. Got very resigned to it, got very numbed out, right? In a way that ultimately would have been very dangerous for me. And that's actually, I think, a good moment to bring in this illustration that I want to share. Which is this psychological model called the window of tolerance. And this is a model that comes from psychology, and specifically through the study of trauma, and is really, really helpful in kind of understanding some of these things. So without getting too technical here, we'll just point out that the window of tolerance, what's meant by that, is that each of us has an optimal state, a state where all of our parts, our body, our mind, our heart, our energy, all of the many parts that make up those things are operating in their optimal state, right? So a healthy allostasis would include all of the parts of ourself are adjusting to change, are shifting, are responding, are flowing according to whatever's happening and according to our full capacity. That's our optimal state. In that state, we're able to access our thoughts and emotions clearly. We're able to stay mentally and emotionally engaged in things. Our body's able to function the way that we need it to. We're integrated in our body, our mind, our heart, and we're able to respond to whatever's happening, even if it's extremely stressful, in ways that where we're not overloaded. As we move towards the edges of that window of tolerance, as either the circumstances grow more and more difficult to where we can no longer respond in a healthy way, or our internal resources get degenerated for whatever reason, which might include the choices that we're making about how we behave, our window of tolerance can shrink, can get smaller, and we can get pushed up against the edge of that optimal state. And when we tip out of that optimal state, where our system starts to get haywire and our allostasis gets out of control, where the shifts, the changes that are happening in all of the parts of ourself get too much for us to regulate properly. We can go in one of two directions. And in this model, we show it as either going too far up or too far down. That's an arbitrary distinction to just help us understand it. But if we go too far up out of our window of tolerance, we go into a hypoarousal state. And in that state, like the way that we might experience it or express it, it can include restlessness or inability to relax, hyperactivity, hypervigilance, or paranoia. Physically, it can show up as digestive issues, as like heart rate issues, sleep problems. Emotionally, it can look like explosive anger, and it can look like panic attacks. So anger and fear kind of expressed in their biggest, most aroused states. As we talk about often in HeartScape spaces, anger and fear are not bad. They are important aspects of our consciousness that help us to focus our attention and make decisions, but they can get out of control in our system. And in hyperarousal, oftentimes anger and fear are out of control in our system. On the other side of things, below the window of tolerance, we can go into hypoarousal, which is basically the opposite. It's where everything slows down, where our responses become sluggish and slow. Our ability to respond like shrinks way down. We can go into a state of lethargy, of depression, a sense of disconnection from ourself, from our life, from other people, from the circumstances that we're in. We can go into dissociation, where our mind kind of checks out from our body. We don't even really notice what's going on in our body, which is why we so often begin with those just simple check-ins of how am I feeling? And even that can be extremely difficult, if not impossible, when we're in a state of hypoarousal. We can feel fatigued, we can feel disoriented, we can experience low blood pressure and pain, like aching pain in the body when we're in a state of hypoarousal. And so if we think about that model, oftentimes we will have a direction that we tend to go. I tend to go towards hypoarousal. So I tend to drop below my window of tolerance when I am not in an optimal state, when I'm either being overloaded by the situation or when I'm not taking good care of myself. And so my capacity diminishes. I will tend to go into depression, lethargy, dissociation, numbing out, that kind of space. There are other people in my life who shoot right up into hyperarousal, into explosive anger, into anxiety, into, compulsive activity. And none of these things are because there's something bad about us. These are strategies. They're brilliant strategies that our systems have developed, over our evolution and over our individual lifetime to deal with intolerable situations. Right? It's how we survive intolerable situations. So there's something to be appreciated. In fact, we do a whole set of, there's a circle that I sometimes hold that's really about kind of appreciating and showing gratitude to those parts of ourselves that have figured out these strategies for like just dealing, with intolerable things. However, it's easy to see how living inside of those states, being in those states consistently over time, becomes a toxic lifestyle, and it becomes a thing that in and of itself is a source of harm. And they can be really challenging to get out of. However, the good news is the techniques to soften that, to make it more likely that we stay in our window of tolerance, are very simple and accessible. And Jewel talked about, having those moments throughout the day where we choose to drop into one of these simple practices that helps us to regulate those states. And in that regulated space, we can make better decisions about how we deal with the stresses in our life. We can find those places of possibility, even inside of situations that feel impossible, that feel like we couldn't possibly get out of this, we couldn't possibly change this. Because those kinds of stresses, once we're out of our window of tolerance in either direction, our vision narrows, our sense of possibility shrinks, our ability to see pathways out, to be creative, to be imaginative, to be intuitive, to find solutions, even if it's just for ourselves, inside of ourselves, but possibly even solutions for the situation at large, they shrink. We lose that ability when we are outside of our window of tolerance. And so one of the things that's been most profound for me about practicing the system of Reiki consistently and then weaving it into my day-to-day life in ways that are automatic because of that consistency is that my sense of possibility has widened tremendously. My ability to see, okay, even in this situation where I can't just solve the whole problem. I can't get rid of the situation. I can't completely leave this issue. But there are choices that I can make, actions that I can take, changes that can happen that I could initiate that could make this better. And we have to be able to be in our sense of grounding, that we're on a firm foundation, that we're fundamentally safe. That's our first diamond work, being in our belly, in our feet, in our connection to the literal ground that holds us secure. We have to start there. And then we can move into the second diamond in the head where we feel spacious. We feel that sense of possibility, that sense of imagination, of intuition, of vision. We can't feel that if we don't feel safe, if we don't feel like our feet are solid on the ground. So we work there first, then we move into possibility, and then we move into connection. Because through connection with ourself, with each other, with the world, with the circumstances that we're in, allows us to feel like what we do matters and the choices that we make matter. And all of that has a tremendous impact on whether or not we feel that the stress in our life is something that's oppressing us and harming us, or something that's actually motivating us. That's a source of energy for us to make change in our life. A sense of motivation to see things differently and to see different possibilities. I was just talking with one of my students yesterday who is working through this kind of dynamic of feeling very trapped inside of certain circumstances of her life. And she was just sharing the other day that she had a conversation with a person at work around something that felt impossible to change. And she just took a chance, right? Did her practice first, got herself that sensation of being grounded, of being open to possibility, being connected to this other person, and open the conversation about could things be different? And they can. They're working their way through solutions to something that she felt was just going to be an absolute point of aggravation forever that couldn't change, right? So like this was something to celebrate, because when we first started working together a few months ago, there was no sense of possibility around this situation. And she was more, trying to work with Reiki to kind of like, soothe, almost as like a medicine to soothe the hurt on the back end. But now she realizes that practicing Reiki doesn't just soothe the hurt on the back end, it actually allows us to be more proactive in our life because we feel that sense of possibility and of resources. Okay, we're at the end of our time. It always is just not enough time to get through everything that I'd love to share, everything that I'd love to drop into practice with you all around. But that's why this is a sweet taste of Heartscapes, not the full meal. And so if any of this has sparked any interest for any of you here live on the call or watching on the replay, I'd love to continue this conversation with you. There are a number of ways that we can dig into any of the topics that we have been talking about here, beginning with learning the system of Reiki from its Japanese origins, whether you have experience with that system prior or not. The students that we work with come from a wide range of experience levels with Reiki, and we come back into that beginner's mind. We start at the beginning and we walk our way through the whole system from the perspective of the mindsets that we're talking about here. We also offer special topics classes, community spaces. We run a monthly practitioner circle where we can drop in and practice around these things. And then there's going to be a few more classes and retreats opened up in the new year, so you can keep an eye out for all of that. I will send an email that provides this recording and any other resources that we talked about and upcoming opportunities. And I encourage you to be in touch with me, continue the conversation. So thank you all for being here, either live or on the recording. I love these monthly opportunities to just dig into something that feels juicy. Again, if you have any requests or suggestions on topics that we dig into in the future, please do let me know. And I hope that as you go into your day, you feel deeply provisioned for whatever stresses the world brings you, and that you see those stresses as a point of motivation rather than a point of harm. Thank you so much. Cheers. I'll see you next month.